There was once a city, above whose entrance was a notice that announced, "We were born what we are, but for them to grow, it had to go." A father told his son, "Being reasonably civil to and tolerant of others due to your own understanding is quite different than being so based on some external philosophy or expectation." And the head of a certain family of hippos who regularly watch our show turned to his brood and said, "It's a good thing that other creatures on this planet aren't still evolving physically as man continues to do so mentally." And as if by reflex, his eldest boy suddenly glanced toward the bathroom as they all enjoyed a hearty laugh over this prospect. A man found a new old coin and some dirt in his backyard, and on it was an inscription that said, "All words are metaphors." He took it into the house and sat with it for several days, pondering the message, until his mind finally thought these words: "If all words are metaphors, then there's nothing more to think about." And he reburied it back in the yard for the next person to find. On another world is a certain creation story that says that shortly after man was brought forth and placed in his proper setting, the gods made all the streets one way. But that's okay, because in the grid pattern in which all the streets were laid out, alternate streets run in opposite directions. Some people now believe that this planet was the home of neurology. Two guys were talking, and one said, "Drugs make me sick." And the other replied, "Obviously not sick enough." Not only is single-mindedness not possible for those with multiple versions, but even its attempt unsavory. After some years engaged in a study of human existence, one man came to the conclusion that some people do and some people don't. And after taking one more really good peek at life, which was peeking back at him, added, "And I reckon it's up to me to decide which are which, right?" And life nodded right back, "Right." In the reference section of the library, a kid picked up a book whose cover, after the listing of the title and author, proclaimed, "The most complete work of its kind." Pondering this for but a moment, he turned to his father and said, "But why have to state this fact? Would not any intelligent man in such an undertaking include therein everything that he knew on the subject?" And his father smiled, hoping to himself that the younger would ultimately place the pertinence of what he had just noted into the area of his own mental processes. While strolling by the reservoir one day, a man paused and pondered, "Why will men, from the highest to the lowliest, so readily sit still for an interview?" There was once a man who was visited by an alien force, which gave to him this secret message: "Every hill has its valley." And for many years did the man cherish and struggle with the implications of this revelation, until he finally told the whole story to his uncle, including the secret message. And his uncle had only this to say: "If that was the secret, then your alien wasn't near alien enough." In our universe, men love games of chance because there aren't any. Well, any that they can readily comprehend. To say that the experience of extended ignition frees one from comment is to say that one is liberated from the unnoticed veil of distortion in which routine thought wraps reality. One day, a certain father told his son, if you don't talk about yourself, ordinary people won't find you particularly likable. And the lad asked, is that in the nature of a warning or a suggestion? Just some info, my boy, some simple info. Religion update. Few will will follow one not based on tales of its founders' hardships and bad experiences. Count on it, my boy. Just count on it. Amidst the gang debate, various voices arose proclaiming such as survival of the fittest, cause and effect, reward for merit, until one guy jumped up and shouted, you get what you deserve. And everyone suddenly turned toward him in an obvious display that they'd turned on him, until he quickly added, I mean, you get whatever life forces on you. And thus did all involved survive the incident. A man so advised his son, until you reach the place of having no mental comment, you can use the comments I've given you regarding the attempt to achieve this to block out and override the ordinary variety. The scene, a bar. The action, someone asked the band to play. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And the bass player said they could do better than that. That they could play, everybody actually wants to be enlightened. Except they don't. Really. And the joint exploded. And a kid thought, it makes sense. If an expanded state of awareness has the natural potential for man, if an expanded state of awareness was the natural potential for man, then all the histories of those who've attempted it wouldn't clearly reveal how few ever succeeded. And he blew up. Once upon a time, the whole world was divided into two groups. This one guy and everybody else. And one day, everybody else got together and declared to the one guy, we want to know the meaning of us being here and being able to want to know. My question to you is this today's myth, allegory, or joke? Items a la carte, one's alma mater. Definition, the news. Gossip disguised for the pseudo-educated. A child came running home soon after being sent off to school for the first day, protesting that its official emblem was a sow's ear. Genes will take a lot, but they won't take being pushed around, except by other genes claiming that they should be. Got it? Well, go get 'em, team. On, you fighting purple furies of a silk purse. The doctor said to the audience, being in love makes you feel better all over. And a chap standing in the doorway was tempted to add that being enamored with the great possibility makes you feel good in even more places than that. But he knew that no one would get it. One time on one world, an older creature and a younger one were sitting and talking. And the older one said, even making your best efforts, it still takes most of a lifetime to ever understand what's going on. And the younger one replied, I can accept the sincerity of your comment, but I've got to ask you, is it your neurons telling me that or your hormones? And the senior reached over and slapped him on the leg, chuckling, why, you're not near as old or young as I thought. The story of rebirth and social position, not told by Moliere nor painted by Titian. Part 1. Father, why do only the unhip want to be hip? Well, son, have you considered the possibility that everyone is unhip? Part 2. One man says that he was dead in a previous life. The end. Talk is a dance. Talk is the noise your feet make when you think. And one man finally said to his son, all right, it can be permissible to be a hermit, but you've got to be able to do it without anyone knowing it. And thus was the lad saved, having to join a monastery. More myths. Once, everyone felt that they had promise, but soon began to feel they were cursed. A few struggle to start afresh, where there is again promise. Myth within a myth. A few within the few will, in fact, settle for no less. A benefit of having no comment is an increase in energy. Another is that the tempo of time becomes pliable. The nationalistic divide up man into us and them, the religious into saints and sinners, psychiatrists into the sane and the disturbed, and the more conscious divide up man into the more conscious don't divide up man. Without warning, one pleasant Wednesday, a thought suddenly flashed through one man's mind. The less you say, the more you know. And although he could not immediately grasp the full implications of the idea, or even its coherence for that matter, he was still so struck by it that he fully remembered it damn near through the weekend. T&E. One man's theory was, don't ask me to come back. And his successful execution came when he was able not to. Notwithstanding the fact that there is a singular strangeness about even talking about a consciousness not supported by comment. I was again going to show you that even that notwithstanding, much less the history of and suspicions of so-called mystical secret work, mystical traditions, it is not that far removed from ordinary life, which I must admit is stretching the language, because from ordinary people's view it is extremely far away. But then you've got to remember how teeny is this planet. When you're in the ordinary state of consciousness, I know it can be a long way if you live in Queens or in Manhattan to think you got to go somewhere to Queens to go see a show, or if you live in Los Angeles to think, my God, I'm not going to drive way out to the far side of Orange County, the southern part. But this is a teeny place. It's according to how teeny your consciousness is for you to remember that. But it is very misleading for you to think that anything is foreign. Anything is extremely foreign to man. And I don't mean just theoretically, because theoretically is simply a fool's version, a child's version of physics. There was one tonight, if you notice, a man who was visited by an alien that gave him a secret, and his uncle finally said if that was a secret, the alien wasn't near alien enough. He got one or two laughs, which I guess was a mercy laugh because it wasn't intended to be a joke anyway. You cannot get far enough away if your own consciousness expands enough. If you can ignite your own brain into new areas, this planet is just of no size whatsoever. You can then move on, if you want to carry it a little bit further, at least perhaps allegorically, you can move on to the universe. But as far as trying to feel some kinship to this planet or to encompass an understanding of humanity, a mystic, a Buddha, just shortly after the enlightenment, when he stops and maybe wipes something out of his eye, it takes about that long, and you've got that covered. You didn't lose your place. That although all ideas of doing something, of the enlightening experience, the Buddhahood and all of that, or conversion, the Christian and Judaic idea of a whole new man, if you try and take it literally, that it's possible, then it does at first blush seem extremely far away. Thus, how else would you explain the fact that in all other aspects, quite reasonable or sane people will go devote their life attempting to affect this kind of experience, this kind of change, that they are prepared to. When they're warned, well, this may take you all of your life and you may not succeed, and they go, well, I have no choice. I'm up to it. I've got to. It is not that far away. Ordinary people would find that astounding, ordinary sane people. And again, recall we're talking about just the ordinary people of the world. When I start speaking again of ordinary people and to show you how close, in a quite real sense, the mystical experience, enlightenment, and all such of that ilk is to ordinary people, I'm talking about the shank of humanity, the middle class, although if we wanted to, I could take the fringes, I could take and show you the same example because they are in you at the fringes, if you're ordinary middle class to start with, of lunatics, criminals, the antisocial, those less evolved currently in the ordinary sense, the more simplistic, allegorically, metaphorically, they can still be seen as not being that far removed. I could even make a case for those who are at the fringes of ordinary society as being even closer to the mystical experience. I won't, for two real good reasons, just as a joke, for two real good reasons, because some of you would encourage you more the way you're going, you antisocial misfits. And others is it make some of you think, well, I missed something. So I won't do it. So recall, we're speaking of just the ordinary middle class, allegorically, the middle of the road, the middle of life, life's existence through man. We have all the way from culture through, let's say, religion. You have very well-known aspects, ideas, dreams, that I would like you to see are a direct, not just metaphorical, not just a strange tugging at verbal reality on my part, but are a direct reflection of the attempt to ignite one's own system, the neural system, to a further degree. All the way, you could take culture and the arts and into just human affairs. But first, I was going to pick out the idea that's been around as long as we have written history of the longing for some sort of supreme love, just in the ordinary sense to start with, of in the Western world, all the way from the Greeks, the story that the gods had split up man, and you're looking that if you find your other half, your proper other sexual half, I'm talking about just ordinary physical love now, that it is an extraordinary event, that it is worth a man's effort. And the Greeks were already writing poetically about how there had been mythical figures, their gods, in some of their mythical histories. There had already been men who devoted their life, gave up their kingdoms in search of a Helen, that they would forfeit everything. And then you have the troubadours in the Western, in Europe, with a real idea of courtly love, and you have running parallel to all of this, a kind of metaphorical, it's always been taken to be, of course, a kind of metaphorical yearning described of men wishing, certain men would be mystics now, of a supreme love, which is to find the face of God, to be able to get back in touch with creation. But normally they were using the word, or we would now, God. The desire of this supreme love, this burning, which represented to them, in many cases, the symbol of the awakening, of the enlightenment, of igniting one's own nervous system to a further extent. And I'm not going to try and quote any, surely plenty of you have read it, but our Western literature and the Eastern, but is full. You know, from the Blakes to all kinds of anonymous writers in the 12th and 13th century, into the Sufis, into the Middle East. Describing their love for God in terms which you understood meant there was a yearning for something else. And it was a yearning to be more conscious. It was a yearning to understand what life was about. So you've got that and certain shades of it. The moralistic, the civilized, and sometimes a kind of religious-based longing that men have expressed that they wish to be the friend of humanity, which could be generally lumped into the desire to be compassionate. And I am not shortchanging that because there have been almost as many words probably written in various ways about that as there has been about the notion of love, of romantic love, of it being a desire physically to find your lover, to find someone of the opposite sex. It just sets you on fire so much. It just makes you glad to be alive. A doctor in one of my news items tonight was addressing the convention. He said, being in love makes you feel good all over. And it does. If all of you can remember, you're fascinated by someone, just call it love. Sexually attracted in the initial times, you never get colds, you feel good, it's that kind of goo-goo-eyed things that teenagers used to do, but you can do it after you're a teenager. That the other person just seems to make you happy, and you've got all these hormones going on, and it makes the body feel good. So you've got all the way from that level of people writing that kind of love poetry to those writing for that they are wishing for a desire, that they love God, and they wish that God would speak, that they are like a lover. They are like a Juliet below, Romeo below a window calling out to Juliet. That you're trying to get God to respond. You're trying to get an answer to the questions. You're trying to get life itself to scratch you where you're itching. Now within that, as I said, are certain shades that have been normally referred to as trying to be compassionate, trying to be a friend to humanity. And there's even sort of a subsection of that of people whose life seems to be, their desire seems to be that in some way through rituals, through prayer, through study, they want to develop a superb, a superior, a greater reverence for life itself. And all of this turns into various forms of attempted or dreamed of charity, compassion, tolerance for your fellow man. All of this can be easily seen, and those of you who've done it, you can of course mark out seen, which is simply the preface to experience, that all of this is absolute reflections of the desire to awaken for enlightenment, or as I've put it to you much more directly, that it is literally what it's always been, that the Buddha and the Muhammad's and the Confucius and everyone who understood enough extraordinary that are now depicted in history as someone who was in touch with some superior knowledge, some extraordinary connection to reality, to creation, etc. is one thing. It is always one thing. It is the brain itself. It was that person's intelligence being ignited to a place that was not necessary. Literally, a part of their brain, they became more conscious. They simply got fired up. I think in the last time we met, I was trying to get you to consider the fact that in spite of, notwithstanding people always talking about in more religious terms after the fact, once they have shifted their weight back and are no longer that they're no longer living in residence as much in the new area as they were, that then they want to refer back to the experience as being something in the soul, in the heart, and etc. And if you recall, I even made physical gestures and saying the enlightenment, all of it, is one place only. Now it is there, that's where it happens, but do understand it's not simply limited to that, because if love, being sexually infatuated, hormonally makes you feel good all over and healthy, imagine what this does. So even though this is where it is, it affects the whole body. A man is not just simply, it's not just an intellectual experience, in other words. You can see all of this. the burning desire is expressed all the way from love itself, of people just saying, all I want out of life is to find a lover. And it can be at a quite simple physical level to start with. It can range from that all the way into the metaphorical when they are writing the allegorical prayers and supplications to God. Please answer me, respond to my love. I so much want to be a better person. I so much want to be a real, at a simple level, wherever they are, they can say, I so want to be a real Jew or a Muslim. But they're calling out, they cannot affect what they think they're looking for. And so the prayer goes out, not just, where is my lover? Where is my physical lover, my man or woman, the other body, the other part, my hormonal counterpart on this planet, but where is it at a higher level? All of this can be seen and experienced for those of you that, with which that term is more appropriate, that is exactly, all they're talking about is the Buddhahood. All they're talking about is the experience of the And I will put it to you even more specifically. Because of the experience, you are rendered freed from comment neurally. You no longer, at that moment, at those moments, let's right now speak in absolute so I don't have to keep shading it and playing with words, that you have ignited your own nervous system, that it has happened. And there you are, Now you are Buddha, you're Abraham, you're Confucius, you are Shintoism, Hinduism personified. You are everything that's ever happened in the nervous system of man of any note, of any consequence. And it's It is instant then, it is total, it is not shaded. What you find is, you are absolutely conscious. You are still you. And to pull in my other picturization, since I started, I'm stuck with it for a while. You have moved from this one foot of you were simply Moses over here in captivity to the old nervous system. I guess I draw this so often I think everyone knows it and I just forget to be more specific. But the whole idea of Egypt, the human nervous system as being the brain, is where everyone is living. And that's just what I've been referring to as a level of consciousness, and you've got it. It is there. It is you. It is you collectively, which is not much of an excuse, and it's not really much of an explanation, but it is useful to look around because nobody's holding you back. Everyone lives in Egypt. Doesn't matter where you live, taking that parable. You're in captivity, which once you understand you're not in captivity, but everyone lives in Egypt. That's what this is. To ignite the brain, for it to happen, and you have become enlightened. You have become Buddha at that point. You are Moses, and you have stepped across, looking at this as the Red Sea. You have stepped across from there. Or as Abraham breaking up the idols, here's the idol worship. It's the old ideas. It's got nothing to do with religion and gods. Not if you understand it in a useful manner. But once you move, like my story of Moses has moved from one foot to here, he shifted the weight. What you've gone, look at below that line as being the right foot in Egypt and above it the left. At the time in which you do that, and I pointed out, mixing up all these picturizations, that and this, you don't get on one foot. Oh, all right. For a while you are the Buddha, for those few hours or days, all right, you are almost like this. It's what makes it so blooming extraordinary. It's why people dread, to say the least, when they feel it slipping away and they realize, I'm about to fall back over, at least partially. I'm about to step back in Egypt. In other words, I'm about to fall back to being me. The first time, you don't know how much. You think, am I going to lose it all? Was this a one-time shot? Which for many people throughout history has been. That really doesn't apply to anybody. Don't worry about that. Now, well, I didn't mean this just a one-shot deal. That's the ones that end up writing books about it. That's the ones that end up, in a sense, suffering over it. But at any rate, you feel yourself shifting back, and very shortly, as long as you're alive, you end up having to stand on both feet. So to say that the enlightening, the experience, the ignition of oneself at a higher level, an expanded level, to say that you are freed from comment. You are freed from comment up there. You are freed from comment over here in the promised land. But back here, everybody's still talking. The Tower of Babel is always with you. Don't worry about taxes and fleas and dandruff. The Tower of Babel, that old part of you will always talk. And Abraham can break up all the idols he wants to, whatever that represents. But do note, friends and neighbors, they will put them back together as fast as he can break them. It didn't put idol worshippers out of business. The Egyptians did not do without slaves once the Jews got away, and they went, well, I guess that blew that. We had a good thing. You know, Jesus goes in, turns over the money changers' tables, which you can figure out what that means. Turning over just the standard street level ideas. He turned over, made them all mad, and left. I mean, you didn't think that they went, well, by God, that taught us a lesson. We'll never do that again. All they did was wait, and is he gone? And they went back in business. That's the idea that you end up here. And so it sounds very strange, even if you try to follow it as being a literal, faithful statement, which coming from me, I assume that you do realize if it had been allegorical, I would have said it. But I started out pointing out that it sounds strange to even talk about being conscious if you've never had the experience without comment. Now, there are many references in the so-called mystical literature to this idea. One of the more common ones I brought up recently to you, the idea that the Zen schools, the Zen tradition uses, that the mind is a busy place. It's like a pond with winds always disturbing it. And the whole idea of the rituals, the whole idea of the tradition, the idea to reach enlightenment is to make whatever efforts is necessary, go through whatever their procedures are. And the enlightenment is one day it goes, and the wind stops, the chatter stops, the noise stops. But their picture is the wind stops disturbing the mind, and it gets clear, it gets calm for the first time, and thus when it becomes calm, it's the same as trying to see your reflection down in a pool of water, and if the wind's blowing, it's all broken up, you can't make sense. But if it stops, you look down, and it is now a perfect mirror. And their story goes on that if the mind becomes like that, you are no longer reflecting fragmented pieces of reality. Your mind is now a perfect reflector, and you now see reality as it is. It's a beautiful story, beautiful picture. The wind does not stop blowing, or to take my description of it. You are not without comment, but the new level is without comment. And so it sounds strange to the best mind, to an ordinary, sane, civilized person who might try to listen to such as this for the first time, and you try to tell them, which, notice, I don't go out trying to make a religion out of this or even talk about it much, because it's just right in somebody's face and they can't do anything with it. It accomplishes nothing. But if you try and tell a very educated, attentive person that the whole idea of all such as this, or to describe the experience, that if it happens, that what you end up is you're conscious, but in a way that you're freed from comment. Now I can go through this kind of thing, that I do often go, well, and go through all this, that if you, and we don't have to worry about somebody else, look at you. It's the operation of the mind. You go, well, conscious with no comment. And you try and think, how can it be? But you understand, all of that's a comment. It's not just a cheap turning around of old Zen ideas. I keep attributing it to that kind of thing. I know that probably some of you were captivated by that 20 or 30 years ago. That kind of apparently would be mystical non sequiturism. You go, oh, that, boy, you know, it's so weird that the sense just ate itself up. It must have great, supreme mystical significance. It just actually makes no sense to tell for the ordinary mind to say, to hear it and go, all right, I could be conscious and have no comment about it. It is strange, is I think a reasonable word to a good, ordinary, stable mind. If they heard it and tried to sincerely consider it, I think that they would accept strange as a workable adjective. That yes, that sounds strange. And yet, I refer you back to where we started. Look at everything that even the middle class, that is, the ordinary sane people who are the heart of humanity constantly, look at everything that they proclaim to be worthwhile. And that is all the way from love, which gets into family, patriotism. It gets in, and not just the religion and the ones I started out of being a compassionate, decent person. Look at those that would remove all traces of the clerical, the religious, the mystical, and ordinarily, I guess now you'd refer to them as humanist, that they're just attempting, that they would say, well, the goal of any good, decent person is to be more civilized, to encourage others to live their fullest, to help others to eat, to have a decent standard of living. I'm jumping back and forth now, in case no one noticed. I suggest, and I'm telling you, being without comment, being conscious without comment. Last time I just sort of hit it in passing. When you're freed from comment, you realize that all comment that you normally have, what little, I'm not even going to worry about the small exceptions, because they're named exceptions, but I always try to give you a little rat hole so that in case you need to catch your breath, it's like a mask coming down for those of you that can't stand the altitude. When we get up there and you go, I know, and so sometimes I say, well, of course there's this and that, and it's like a small oxygen mask if you need it. But now I said, by the way, only wimps, only sissies need oxygen. When you're without comment, when you can be conscious, when you have the experience, you do understand then, you simply understand all of the prohibitions, all the warnings that you've heard and read all of your life, and that I've even thrown in my share, that, boy, if there's one thing that'll kill you, if there's one thing that'll keep you where they are, if there's one thing that'll keep you in captivity, if there's one thing that'll keep you exactly where you are, it's hostility. And then I can name it all sorts of things. We can get out our handy thesaurus and just come up with endless synonyms and shades of it. Annoyance, hostility, irritation, judgment, partisan thought, opinionation. It's all the same thing. And none of it actually makes coherent sense. I cannot wrap it up, and I can do it and say, well, what you have got to understand is what you ordinarily think. I know people call it feel many times, but what you ordinarily think is hostile. And you can argue that forever. You can end up dancing with that because I can turn right around and say, well, that's not true. I could take somebody's part and you can say, that's not hostility, but once you see it, it is. Once you see it, I tried to trick some of you, or all of you, a long time ago, to slip up from another direction when I was several times have brought up the fact that at the ordinary level, that is, ordinary people doing it, all humor is hostile. The people are laughing, having a good time, and it's hostile. And some of you seem to have got something out of it every time I would bring it up and say, all right, here's the way to do it. Take the punchline to any joke. And you don't have to look hard, just look at it and take out any possible hostility. You may just have to change one word, or maybe 2 or 3 words, and the sense will say the same thing, but take out any possible hostility. You got to be this good, you can't go, well, no, wait a minute, that didn't mean, take out any possible hostility if it actually happened. It's no longer funny. Now, I have pulled this several times, and several times I've seen a handful of you go, ah, here's the follow-up. It only took me several years. Took you several years. I could have done it the same night. If you take the hostility, and it's there, take any possible, if you don't like hostility, back to my, for those of you who don't know, it was considered to be the grandfather of all European Western jokes for a long time, at least as per Henny Youngman. Guy says, who was that lady I saw you with last night? That was no lady, that was my wife. That used to get big yucks. You can say the same thing, take out the hostility, because you understand this hostility, the guy who answers, the guy that delivers the punchline, is hostile toward his wife. He obviously doesn't like her. Of course, you laugh. If you're actually dancing and you actually laugh to that reflexively, it would show what you seem to think about certain things. If you take out the hostility, take out the repetition of the setup line. Who was that lady I saw you with last night? It was my wife. You can find it. You can find hostility of a kind The word is no good, but there is no word, because it is part of the room. It is part of the room in which you live. It's green. It has a fiery breath, and you live in that apartment, that one-room apartment, and you don't realize that you're sharing it with a dragon, because the dragon's so large you don't even notice it. You don't realize that it is hostility. Now back to the update to this. There are certainly, since I've admitted there is no real good description. Hostility is not much of a word to say that all humor is hostile. But now I'm telling you that does anybody need, with very few exceptions, comment is hostile. Now last time I tried to slip up on you a little bit again and say that it's sort of like, since all of it grows out of the physical survival urge in man, that in a sense it is defensive. In the same way that you can say all animals, all sentient animals, that, especially carnivores, but anyway, any sentient creature you can say is hostile. He's got to be. A wolf's got to be hostile, or else a lion will eat him, or a panther. And a panther's got to be hostile, or else a lion will eat it. That is, it's got to be hostile in the sense that it's got to be always defensive, because it's, I believe as Confucius says, it's et or be et. There is a similar situation here, and I'm doing all of this again so that you won't choke and do it on your own. Hostile doesn't tell you much, but once you understand it, it tells you as much as anything. Once you see it, you understand why I said hostile, and you can forget it. You go, oh yeah. But you are then experiencing what I said is the two souls of enlightenment. The first one is so, and the second one is so. That's why you couldn't describe it. You do the same thing in individual cases, like me calling all comment hostile. All comment you make. We're talking about mental comment. Forget out here. Here is the only thing that's important right now. All of this is hostile. And I've admitted it's not, but once you see it, then you remember that I said it was all hostile and said it wasn't, you go. And if I was there when you did it, and I said, well, all right, you see me. And I said, well, what would you use? then you'd see it as well as I do. You go, you know. It's either, you know, hostile or, you know, vulcanization, I don't know. Hot sauce. Back to where we were. That all of the highest aspirations of man, at the lowest level and the highest level. Remember, all the way from seeking your love, if you're just an ordinary person. There's certainly nothing wrong with it, but if you're just an ordinary Joe, not looking for any kind of great enlightenment in life, and that you're still middle of the road sane, at the very least what you look for. You know this. People are constantly talking about it throughout history, and you can stick a mic in somebody's face on the street right now, pick out somebody that looks like he's ordinary, driving a nice pickup truck, wearing work clothes, and obviously he's probably not very educated, and you say, what's the purpose in life? We're trying to do a survey, and what is to you, just you personally, and he's going to say something if he's over 25. He's going to say something about, well, my family. Or if he doesn't have a family, he said, well, what I'm really trying to find is a real good woman. I mean, I hope to find somebody, you know, like my mother. I hope to find somebody at least will make me as happy as my mother made my father. I want that feeling of being in love and raise a family. All right, that is the highest aspiration at a low level, you might say, at a simple level. And I'm not using low as a judgment, but as opposed to someone attempting to find God at the ordinary level, the expression. And so all of that is a higher aspiration, the highest that he can aspire to. Even though it may sound simplistic if you're been threatening to go join a monastery or go travel to Tibet trying to find a secret group running the world or in touch with God still by some mental telepathy, or better yet, they actually got some kind of piece of actual physical technology that's been passed around now for 8,000 years that actually communicates with God. But you understand, at a simple level, the guy made up, just an ordinary man, if he says, well, what I want out of life, what would make me the happiest is to find a woman that I'm just crazy about, that I just be with the rest of my life and I'll never want to run around on her and I'll just be happy to be around her, and that's what I want. You do understand that at a level, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's his level, that is his highest aspiration. And I'm saying now highest in a real sense, because it's better than him saying, well, what I want to do is I want to hold up fruit stands. I want to hold up 7-Eleven stores. I want to find a woman that I can beat up. Maybe she's got a sister, I can beat her up too. Maybe we'll have kids and I'll abuse them. So at a quite reasonable, but a fairly simple level, relatively speaking, we've got everything from the desire for a love, a romantic, physical, sexual love, all the way to people who say that they are seeking the love of God. They're looking for the force of creation, for Shiva himself or Brahma to look down and smile upon you and say, what a comely little creature, to beckon you into creation's boudoir and say, come. And here's the secret. I'll reveal myself to you. Come in, we'll lay together. And throughout all that is the feeling also, as I said, the kind of subcategories that people would say, what I want to do, I don't know why, but I feel I want to be compassion. And that turns into people wanting to do charity work, or people trying to become saints. Or people just who try and write and say, or music, compose music. No, so what I'm trying to do is I want to encourage others to have a greater reverence for life, for us to be more tolerant of one another. And all of that, I'm saying, is a direct reflection of the desire to be more conscious, to have the enlightening experience, to ignite one's nervous system in a new area, to expand it. I can call it higher up, but I don't mean that it makes you superior to other people. But it's to expand it. In a sense, it is higher up. In the midst of all of that, you hadn't lost your place. In the midst of all of that, me saying that being freed from comment, when you ignite the system up here, when you get to the promised land, when Abraham gets out of the house, when he broke up all the idols and left, when Moses gets over there, when Muhammad flees Mecca, when you ignite the nervous system, when you go, and you've had it, it is freed from comment, and then what goes with it is you understand why I said hostile, why everyone, you've heard all these stories about you got to love people and etc. Is you understand then that all the comment is hostile. Notwithstanding the fact that the word sucks. But you also understand what it does. The comments are a direct interference with my compassion, with tolerance. Because as long as you talk about tolerance, as long as you talk about compassion, and I don't mean it's the words doing it, but it's the internal comments. As long as you're thinking about that you wish you were passionate toward another person, that you wish you were tolerant, you can never fully realize it. The comments of the ordinary mind are a veil. I know I got a little poetic tonight, but I'm referring back to me. But to be without comment, to be conscious and be freed from comment, is to be liberated from this normally unnoticed veil. It's a distortion of a veil in which the mind ordinarily wraps reality. It's not your fault. It's not the Egyptians' fault. It wasn't your parents' fault. It wasn't your religion's fault. It was not anyone's fault. The words themselves are a veil, a necessary veil. We wouldn't be here talking about it, is the point. The tricky point, the delightful point once you see it. I could almost make that a third soul, but it's included in the second one about, that's why you couldn't describe it. Yeah, that's why you can't describe anything. Being freed from comment here is then you, not referring to any external system. You don't have to recall my words. You don't recall any philosophy. You don't recall anything you ever read, any injunction against hostility. But it's then you understand that everything your mind has always said is a form of hostility. You understand better, I'm suggesting now with beating on the words, the language again, rather than just being hostile, you understand that it was a bar. It was a distance. It was almost like an inverted Red Sea rather than it being a gateway to expanded goodwill, compassion, reverence for life. It was like a barrier. It was like a drainage ditch that kept you. Because as long as you're commenting internally, you are at an arm's distance from reality. And after that, if you say what, then you turn into, you might as well write a book on how to be more awake. You might as well start a religion. Because no one but a fool, that is no one except someone just repeating it, of saying, well, all words, all comments you do internally keeps you from actually directly perceiving reality. And if somebody says, well, Tell me more about it. And you go, well, good. You found somebody to dance with, but you certainly haven't found anyone who understands any more than you. Because it's not. Then they won't know the specifics. Well, exactly. Which one should I watch? And people will take notes. That's part of what religion is. That's what part of theology is about. That's what about the instructions from religions. That's what philosophies is. They say, well, now we are too intolerant of our fellow man, or that we are not compassionate enough. And many people, right thinking, good-natured people go, yes, yes, that's true. What can we do about it? All right, well, get your pens and paper. I got a list of things we should watch for. And you go, okay. You don't need a list of things to watch for. That's like them saying, go home and see if you smell anything resembling smoke in your little one-room apartment. And those of you not colorblind, look around and see what color your apartment is. There's nothing to look for. I've already told you, it's green and it's a dragon. You live with it. To say, well, we'll make a list of the kinds of words, the kind of comments I might have that keep me from feeling this closer reverence, this closer connection to life, to my fellow man. You don't need a list. There is no list. Well, what shall I look for? Can you say everything? But see, that's silly. That's why I keep using my little picture of you go home and think, well, I'm going to meditate or see if I can ever conjure up the picture like of a dragon or a green hippo, a green dinosaur. And you don't realize you're living in a phone booth of one. I mean, there's nowhere to look to say, well, give me a list of the kinds of comments that you might be referring to that does keep me from a more direct perception of reality. There's no list. If I gave you a list, I'd be shoring up the veil, to mix metaphors. I would be thickening up the veil. Me and anyone else. Well, you do it to yourself. But notice, we're back to what else is the mind ordinarily going to do? If you impress someone and say, well, it's comments. It's the internal comments. We're not talking about overt. It's the internal movements, the operations of ordinary consciousness. The brain itself at that level interferes with a more direct perception of what life is about. I shouldn't fool around. The secret. What everything's going on, it's right there. And where? All right? If you go where, and somebody goes, well, here, and you look, or even if you think, well, wait a minute, I know where it is. You don't have to tell me. And you think, I know what it is. It's my religious intolerance. It's my fear of the opposite sex, or it's my hatred of the rich people. It doesn't matter what it is. You can go, I'll look over there. I'll work on that. There's nothing to work on. There's nowhere to look. There's no list to make. Not only am I telling you that the highest aspirations of men at the simplest level, such as my truck driving, 5th grade educated bricklayer that said that his desire in life was to find a woman. I mean, he probably compares, I said his mother, if you caught the point of him saying, what I want's a woman that just makes me glad to come home. I don't care, I've got no good job and I'll never do any better than I'm doing in life, but just to come home and she makes it worthwhile. At that level, that is a high inspiration, not as a civil aspiration. It is better than him wanting to go out and kill people, you understand? So at a simple level, nothing wrong with it, but at a simple level, that is humanity's highest aspiration, all the way into people right now spending their life 20 hours a day trying to meditate, chant, sit, pursue some tradition, writing poetry, dreaming, chanting, praying out, not just for sexual love, hormonal love, but for a spiritual love with God, with the secret. Throughout it all, I am telling you, it is all a reflection of the desire for to ignite one's own nervous system, and the ignition thereof renders one conscious and freed from comment. And what one understands then is that all the comment, you understand my word hostile then, that all the comment is a veil. It is a barrier. But what it brings to you at the time then is what everybody else dreams of is possible. Because what it brings with it, what ensues is an unconditional feeling of goodwill, which is the reality behind people out now being saints. People taking upon themselves 24-hour-a-day works of charity, out feeding the poor, out helping the sick, which there's certainly nothing wrong with it. But that still never satisfies them. Because the satisfaction, the itch, what they're all after, those praying, those chanting, those taking drugs, those fasting, what they're after is internally, personally, individually, is they want a higher and expanded ignition in their brain. They want, whether they ever heard about it or not, they want Buddhahood. They want Buddha's moment of enlightenment. They want the time that suddenly Abraham looked around and everybody, including his own family, what it represents, they were all worshiping idols. They all are thinking the same thing that everybody else thinks, and they thought was the highest possible level. Abraham didn't attack his father. He didn't say, well, you old idiot. He just simply looked around and realized this is not it, and he broke them all. That takes, after he did that, we'll assume that that was his moment of Buddhahood, of enlightenment. At that moment, he had such goodwill. He wasn't mad at those doing that, because once you see it, at that moment, you understand there's nothing wrong with the world. The world does not need saving. It's not your mission to help people. But then, the whole dream that you may have had and that humanity has at its highest mechanical level of wanting to be more compassionate, wanting to be more tolerant, wanting to feel some sort of reverence for other people, there it is. There's nothing to work for. I'm just putting a term on it, bringing it back to reality level. It is just unconditional goodwill. And all it takes is, putting it simple, to make the point, all it takes is being conscious with no comment. And then it's not a problem you don't worry about. Well, now let's see if I can be more compassionate. It still doesn't mean you're necessarily going out and become a charitable would-be saint. But the point is you no longer have any comment. And if you have no comment, there's no barrier between you and goodwill. There's no barrier between you and what everyone else considers the secret of life. I like some of the people personally in my stories and news items that put it a little more directly. I'd like to know what's going on. I know to many people it probably does not sound as mystical or as interesting as the secret of life. To be freed from comment internally is to have the full realization of every dream that humanity has had collectively up until this point at the verbal level. But do you see the justice? Do you even verbally, God help me for saying it, do you even verbally see the justice and the beauty in that the very things that people describe are the things that cannot be executed? For those of you that, I'll repeat, the man strolling by the reservoir that suddenly realized, the less you say, the more you know. Which I guess is good the tape's out, because if you're ordinary, you could go, that's it, it's a whole new religion. Or that's the way to go about it. No, so that's the thing. That's what I mean about a whole new religion, is people can hear something and go, wait, that's the trick, that's the method. No, 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 it's not the method. That's the reality of it. But when you can't do it, you take the reality of it and go, that's the method. That's it. Is don't talk and then you'll know more. It damn near makes sense. But doing this, it's damn near always made sense, from Plato going, we don't live real valid actual lives. We're in a cave and there's a fire, it's consciousness. And we can't look directly in it, and all we do is we look around, we see our shadows on the walls of the cave. We're living these kind of second-handed lives. It damn near makes sense. I mean, you can damn near make a method out of it. You could call it, if you're really good, you could call it, here it is, the final, the ultimate, the supreme, worldly religion, the backdoor religion. I'm glad we don't have time, because then I could explain everything that all the other religions try to do and take the reality of it that they would talk about would be in the promised land or in the afterlife, and take what it would be and make that the method. It's known as forcing it. And it damn near makes sense. It has been historically also, in a rather watered down version, in the East especially, been referred to as the way of the warrior, of them taking the idea of martial arts and warfare itself and then at least making it allegorically, is to force oneself. It's to steel oneself to be impervious, or at least act like it, to pain, to the assault of others, especially verbal or their opinion, that in some way this will bring you closer to the gods. It damn near makes sense. Because what it is the reality of what it would be if you were closer to the gods. Was known in another lifetime, in another part of the world, back to Europe, as The Imitation of Christ, that book. Is that never mind all this fooling around thinking about it. Here we are, we've got descriptions, this guy thought, Thomas or Kempis or whoever. There was a representation of a whole school of thought at the time. Rather than just worry about the theory of it, we'll take what we know that Jesus said here would be a more complete man. And we'll simply imitate it. I mean, if we imitate and we don't do anything but that, something's got to happen. And again, I repeat, it damn near makes sense. But I'd like to leave without actually making any specific comment thereon. That by any chance all get on?